You are watching a heavyweight boxing match. The year is 1994. The arena is dark except for the ring, which burns white under the lights. In one corner stands Michael Moorer, 26 years old, undefeated, the reigning heavyweight champion of the world. Fast, hungry, in the best shape of his life. In the other corner stands a man who is 45 years old, a man who has not held a world title in 20 years. A man who, when he first retired from boxing, was so broke he had to sell his car. A man who came back to the sport at the age of 38 and whom the entire boxing world dismissed as a joke, a nostalgia act, a cautionary tale about athletes who don't know when to stop. His name is George Foreman, and in the 10th round of this fight, he is going to do something that nobody in the building believes is possible. But to understand why it matters, you have to go back to the beginning. George Foreman was born in 1949 in Marshall, Texas. He grew up in 5th Ward, Houston, one of the poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods in the city. He dropped out of school at 15. He ran with gangs. He mugged people. By his own account, he was heading toward prison or an early death, and he knew it, and he didn't know how to stop. What stopped him was a television set in a recreation center, and a man on that television set named Jim Brown, the football player, talking about the Job Corps, a federal program designed to give disadvantaged young men vocational training and a path out of poverty. Foreman joined. He was sent to a camp in Oregon. And there, a counselor named Doc Brodus watched him get into a fight with another boy, noticed something in the way he moved, and suggested he try boxing. He was 17. Within 3 years, he was standing on a podium at the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, having just won the gold medal in heavyweight boxing, waving a small American flag while the crowd booed. The games had been politically charged, and many athletes had made protest gestures on the podium, and Foreman's flag waving was seen by some as a counter-statement. It made him famous before he had thrown a professional punch. His professional career was devastating. He knocked out opponent after opponent with a ferocity that made experienced boxing observers uncomfortable. He was not elegant. He was not technical. He was force, compressed into a human body, and when he landed his right hand on someone's jaw, they fell in a way that suggested the body had simply stopped receiving instructions. In 1973, he fought Joe Frazier for the heavyweight championship of the world. Frazier was considered nearly unbeatable. He had defeated Muhammad Ali. Foreman knocked him down 6 times in 2 rounds and took the title. He was 24 years old and the most feared heavyweight on the planet. And then came Zaire, October 30th, 1974. The Rumble in the Jungle. Muhammad Ali, who had been stripped of his title for refusing military service and had spent years fighting his way back, challenged Foreman in Kinshasa, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. It was one of the most watched sporting events in history. Every credible boxing analyst picked Foreman to win. Ali was 32. Foreman was at his physical peak. The logic was overwhelming. Ali did something nobody expected. He leaned against the ropes and let Foreman punch him, round after round, absorbing the blows on his arms and body, letting Foreman exhaust himself, conserving his own energy. He called it the rope-a-dope. By the 8th round, Foreman was exhausted in a way he had never experienced, and Ali knocked him out. Foreman won several more fights after Zaire, but something had shifted. He lost to Jimmy Young in 1977, a fight he was supposed to win easily, and in his dressing room afterward, he experienced what he later described as a profound spiritual crisis. He believed he was dying. He saw darkness. And then he felt something that he described as a presence, and when he came back to himself, he was changed. He retired from boxing. He became a Christian minister in Houston. He opened a youth center. He gained enormous amounts of weight. The most feared boxer in the world became a round, gentle, laughing preacher who ran a church called the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ in a poor neighborhood where he had grown up fighting on the streets. For 10 years, nobody heard much about George Foreman, the boxer. And then, in 1987, he announced he was coming back. He was 38 years old. He weighed nearly 260 pounds. The boxing world reacted with a mixture of amusement and concern. Promoters smelled money. Serious analysts smelled tragedy. The consensus was that George Foreman was going to get hurt, embarrass himself, and finally accept that the greatest version of him was 2 decades in the past. He didn't care. He said he was coming back to raise money for his youth center. He said he wanted to prove that age was not a sentence. He smiled constantly. He ate cheeseburgers before press conferences to make journalists laugh. And then he climbed into the ring and started knocking people out again. Slowly, improbably, he worked his way back toward the top. The losses came too. He lost a decision to Evander Holyfield in 1991, a fight many thought he had actually won. He kept going. He named all 5 of his sons George. He became beloved in a way that the terrifying young Foreman had never been, because this version of him was joyful and self-deprecating and completely unconcerned with what anyone thought. Which brings us back to November 5th, 1994, MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas. George Foreman against Michael Moorer. For 9 rounds, Moorer controlled the fight. He was faster, he was sharper, he was 20 years younger. Foreman's face was cut. He was behind on every judge's scorecard. The ringside commentators were already composing their sympathetic post-fight narratives about the valiant old man who had tried his best. In the 10th round, Foreman landed a left jab that snapped Moorer's head back slightly. And then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, he landed a straight right hand directly on Moorer's chin. Moorer went down and did not get up. George Foreman was the heavyweight champion of the world. At 45 years old, 20 years after losing the title in Zaire, he had become the oldest heavyweight champion in history, a record that still stands today, and that most serious boxing analysts believe will never be broken. In his corner, his trainer Angelo Dundee, the same man who had trained Muhammad Ali, was crying. In the arena, people were standing and making sounds that weren't quite cheering, more like the noise a crowd makes when it has witnessed something it cannot immediately process. Foreman took the microphone and dedicated the victory to everyone over 45. He said it was for everyone who had been told they were finished. The psychologist Carol Dweck, whose research on what she calls the growth mindset has influenced education and performance science worldwide, argues that the defining difference between people who achieve things late in life and those who don't is not physical capacity. It is the belief about whether capacity is fixed or expandable. Foreman's return to boxing was not a physical story. It was a story about refusing to accept the narrative that other people had written for him. Here is what most people don't know. The same hands that knocked out Michael Moorer in 1994 had been used, 2 years earlier, to grill chicken in the backyard of his Texas home. George Foreman had invented, or rather, lent his name to and genuinely believed in, an electric contact grill that cooked meat from both sides simultaneously. He had agreed to appear in infomercials for it for a modest fee and a small royalty. The George Foreman grill became one of the best-selling kitchen appliances in American history. By the time Foreman eventually sold his naming rights, he had earned over $200 million from a kitchen gadget, more than he ever made from boxing. The most feared heavyweight puncher in the history of the sport became a millionaire many times over by selling grills. At 45, he was world champion. At 50, he was richer than he had ever imagined. The boy from 5th Ward, Houston, who had been heading toward prison at 15, had become, by any measure, one of the most improbable success stories of the 20th century. George Foreman didn't just refuse to grow old. He made growing old look like the best move he ever made.